Hey, what's up, Armie? Good to see you, man. How you doing today?
Oh, so stoked. Summer's coming. It's like a beautiful late spring day here. Tide's in. Frothing to get out on the water later.
Dude, I know it's windy. I know you're frothing to get out there. Thanks for taking the time. I just want to do, we wanted to kind of get together with you to talk about, like, your foils, why they're working so well. There's a lot of bad information out there right now. Everyone's freaking out about this aspect ratio thing, high aspect. I got to take a shot. Everyone's, like, freaking out about it. So we wanted to meet up with you and kind of talk to you about, what goes into your foils, get a little more of the technical information, because I sure don't know anything about this stuff. You're the engineer in the group. You know what's going on and what's happening.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, Matt, for setting this up and having us on so we can talk about this, because, yeah, there are plenty of foil parameters and aspect ratios getting tons of airtime right now, but the information out there is really confusing, both by brands and just people kind of who don't know what they're talking about. And yeah, it's one parameter out of many that do affect how the foil is going to work for you. And it does affect the drag efficiency of a foil, but there are plenty of other parameters that are equally important.
So, in kiteboarding, what we did is we was like, aspect ratio was pretty, we said we got fat kites and skinny kites. And anyone that came into our shop and said, hey, talking about aspect ratio, we said, you got to take a shot. We'd literally make them take a shot of banana schnapps. It was terrible. And then they didn't talk about aspect ratio anymore. And the reason we did that is because it was so irrelevant to the overall kiteboarding experience. People that didn't kiteboard were talking about aspect ratio, and the same thing's happening right now in foiling.
If you're, just wanting to get out there and enjoy the sport and do it, aspect ratio is irrelevant. Look, like Nuzzo said, you got fat, you got skinny. Fat is easy, skinny is hard. Like, don't overcomplicate it. Get out there and do it. And once you're ripping, then you can start refining what you want to ride. I mean, probably more important than aspect ratio is chord percentage thickness and section shape. Like, those two things and area are actually in the lift equation. So it's not rocket science. I mean, wing design's been around for forever. Yep, you'll get some efficiencies with drag with the higher aspect wing, which is why they're used on gliders. But also, what are the numbers? Like, in reality, the aspect ratios we're mostly talking about with the current foil designs are low aspect in aeronautical terms. In reality, pretty much every foil out there is a low aspect wing. There's a couple that might be mid aspect, and then no one's actually made a high aspect foil yet if you want to look at the numbers. And the numbers have been there for like 50 plus years.
Okay, so you're not setting aspect, like, what is high aspect? Like, what is considered high aspect? You're talking about the numbers. I don't know anything about this stuff, but what is high aspect?
Yeah, well, I mean, basically you're using aeronautical wing terminology, and there's a whole bunch of formula, and it's been worked on by super smart guys for a long time now, and it's not new. So an aspect ratio, basically it goes from 0, obviously, or 0.1. It's going to go up to about 33. I mean, the highest aspect ratio wing out there now is around about 33. That's a super efficient competition glider. However, that thing doesn't turn. So there's always a trade-off in all the parameters involved, and you need to put them all together to make it work. Now, in terms of the lift equation, aspect ratio is not even in there. Aspect ratio does come into play in the drag, but the lift equation is the coefficient of lift, and then you've got the density of the fluid that you're moving through. So for us, it's water, a little bit of variation between fresh water and salt water, but that's pretty minor. Velocity squared, so velocity is a really important factor, and surface area of the wing. That is the lift equation, okay? You can look it up. There's plenty of online Google bloody searches, whatever. But what we can control in the design is the coefficient of lift, which is the shape of the foil section effectively, and the area. So for sure, there are a whole bunch of parameters like we've talked about, and I think we should go through a few today. I've got 10 listed here, and, stop me when it gets boring, but the lift equation...
I'm already lost. I'm already lost. Like, I'm already like...
we haven't even started. The lift equation, okay, it's been around for a long time, and there's been a lot of smart guys working on the parameters of wings to make them work. But in the lift equation, coefficient of lift times half the density, velocity squared area, okay? That's the lift equation. You can look it up, Google it. There's YouTube videos about it. It's pretty simple, okay? We'll put a link to a really simple YouTube video explaining it. But the things that are in there, okay, the coefficient of lift, that is the airfoil section and the angle of attack, those two relationships, okay? Then you've got half density times velocity squared, Okay, now velocity is something that changes obviously, and it's a really big impact, which is why you need different size foils, because if you're going a lot faster, velocity squared, right, it's an exponential relationship. So when you're going a lot faster, you need a lot smaller foil. If you're going a lot slower, you need a lot bigger foil. And then times area. Okay, so area is in there. It's an important parameter, and it's hard to measure. So on a curved shape, area is really hard to measure.
That's awesome. That's why you put area on your wings, because I can see that.
Yeah, and you can measure the span, and hey, span squared divided by area, that's your aspect ratio. It's not very hard to figure out, although for some reason, most people, even making foils, don't even actually know what aspect ratio is. And so they're saying high aspect this, high aspect that, but they're talking about foils that are like around 5 or 6. I mean, hey, 33 is high aspect, man. Like, if you're a 5 and 6, that's a low aspect wing generally. I mean, really low aspect is under 3. So that's why we've gone, let's put a mid aspect in there so that at least we're not completely talking about something that isn't real. So we're going low aspect, mid aspect, and high aspect. So that's the easiest way for us to break it down. And so we're up to around about 4, we're going to call low. Between 4 and maybe 6 or 7, we're going to call mid. And then 7 up, we're going to call high. There's probably 2 or 3 high aspect foils on the market right now. The rest, they're just mid aspect foils, which is great because they work for most people.
Okay, so I got a 1250 right here. Everyone I talk to is like, dude, Armie's finally making a high aspect wing. And I was like, I don't think so, bro. I think that this one's a mid aspect, but I really don't know what I'm talking about. So what?
Yeah, well, it's 5.66. I mean, so, you know, span squared divided by area. I mean, hey, it's not that complicated. 5.66. Interestingly enough, there are some really popular foil brands out there that call themselves high aspect that have got the numbers wrong on their website. I mean, why that is, I don't know. But they have. And are they trying to confuse people? Probably. I mean, the GoFoil guys, numbers mean nothing. I mean, who knows what that even is about, but, you know, something weird. Don't ask me.
Right. Okay, so, so you're not making high aspect wings, right? Like, so you make basically, like, your TF series is low aspect, right? The HS series is mid aspect. And so, like, nobody's making – why would you even make a high aspect wing? Is there a point to that?
Our HS range is mid-aspect. The 1250 is on the higher end of the mid-aspect range for the current foils. But that's what we feel really works for where most people are at right now. Right. And there are definitely some high-aspect foils out there, and they do give you lower drag, but they're harder to turn and generally harder to ride. I mean, I made some high-aspect foils like this. Here's a G10 foil. I made this thing, I don't know, in 2016 maybe. It's CNC G10, very similar to what KD on Maui is doing right now with his prototypes. It's a great way to prototype foils, CNC some G10, super heavy, but you can try stuff. Now, this thing's about around about 8, I think, AR8, and I could kite it, but when I made a bigger one that I was trying to downwind and surf foil on, and I went to Maui and thought I was going to go and show Kai how to do it, and I just ate shit. I couldn't ride it. You know, like I get up on the foil and I just crash every time. Right. And that's because I wasn't good enough to ride a high aspect foil. Now, definitely there are people right now who are, and if you're ripping and you really want to pump around a lot, you can. But our 1050, I would call kind of between a low aspect and a high aspect. It's at the lower end of a mid aspect range. Right. And you could almost call it low aspect, but people love it because you can turn it in the pocket. So what are you trying to achieve, right, with the foil? If you're trying to pump for miles in a straight line, then yep, higher aspect is going to give you an advantage there. However, that has to be paired with a foil section, angle of attack, the whole rest of your foil geometry. I mean, do we want to go into this? I've got a list of 10 points here that are equally important to aspect ratio. So you can't just focus on one element of a wing because it's just not going to give you the answer that you're looking for.
Right. So just tell me what are those parameters? Like you said, your 10 parameters you're looking at. What are those 10 parameters? And we can kind of break those things down.
Yeah. So the main points, okay, when you're designing a foil is the area, because that's in the lift equation, which is a really important parameter. Then the plan form, which is your outline, the amount of leading edge sweep, tip sweep, taper, okay, and your aspect ratio comes into play there. And then you've got your root chord, which defines the grunt in the center of your wing. And those elements are both structural and in terms of the form, especially the root chord and the chord percentage thickness at the root. Okay, so chord percentage thickness, that's the thickness of the foil. So if you take, okay, we're just going to look at the 1250 for a second here. chord percentage thickness is your chord is distance front to back, right, at any point on the foil. And then the thickness, the percentage of that thickness at that chord, okay?
Right.
Now, chord percentage thickness and chord percentage thickness taper, as you come to the tip, is at least equally important to aspect ratio. I would say potentially more important, but they interrelate, okay? They work together. So taper, both planform taper and chord percentage thickness taper work together, super critical parameters in making a foil. The actual section shape, okay, that is also in the lift equation as the coefficient of the lift, the section shape and the angle of attack, okay? Those things relate together, also super important. Form drag, okay, that's the entire rig. Now, form drag, when you look at the fairings, okay, we use really big radiuses on our fairings, both front and back on the connection point on the mast, because that reduces form drag, okay? That's a feature of hydrodynamics. It's super important and actually almost more important in water than air unless you're going super fast. Okay, so also the fuselage, okay? Our fuselages are round where they attach the tail because round is a much better form for moving through water as opposed to a square shape, okay? If you pushing a square through water, especially when you get it on some angle or some roll, okay, a square, it's going to have a bunch of drag. So round is a much better form for moving through the water. Tail pitch, tail angle, tail geometry, okay? So we've got a bunch of shims, obviously, for our tails. The pitch you set your tail on, that has a massive input into how the foil rides, okay? And then flex. Hey, that's a whole nother realm. And we've found a certain flex that we like. If you've got certain materials like alloy that have a kind of what I would call a dead flex, well, you're going to get a different ride. So all of those elements come together.
Everyone's always telling me, like, you know, oh, stiffer mass. We have the stiffest mass on the market. It's like the best because it's super stiff. And it's like, you know, I'm like, okay, well, it kind of, you know, you don't want to have your mass flexing like a noodle. I've had some mass where it's just like a noodle and it's really hard to ride. But I know your mast has some flex to it, where everyone else is saying no flex, and you're saying flex.
Yeah, it's a balancing point. I mean, you definitely want rigidity in the top half of the mast, especially because that's where you're driving it from the board. Okay, so our connection system to the board, I believe, is the best in the world. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, but we got titanium washers that really spread the load. Our mast top plate is got a longer footprint than most. We've got a massive radius on this fairing here, which is bigger than pretty much any I've seen. And that is all about rigidity in the connection from the board to the mast. Now, when you get into the lower part of the mast, obviously you want it moving through the water, so you want to taper it. And that taper lends itself to more flex. But we actually like the flex down here because it smooths out the ride and makes it more forgiving. Right. Now, if you are trying to race a kite foil rig at over 30 knots, then maybe you do need the mast to be stiffer at the bottom because you're really pushing hard on that thing with a massive 19-meter kite. But we're not making race gear. We're making gear to feel good to surf and kite and wing. That's it.
Right. Okay, cool. So my head's about to explode. I understood about 10% of what you just said, which is fine.
I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. We'll put some charts on.
No, it's good. It's fine. You're the designer. That's great. I think it's okay that I don't understand this stuff. You're the designer. I'm the consumer, you know? It's okay. Like all the gear that I ride, what it translates to me is that I can actually ride this stuff and it makes me ride better. Right. So like when I went from riding, I got the 1250 here, and then I've got the 1200, so if I ride the 1200 a bunch, so I go from riding the 1200 to the 1250. The 1200 is easier to take off for me on the wave. It's just easier to more forgiving when I step on that wave. When I get on the 1250, I'm going faster. When I turn, this thing just turns and I kind of it goes quick and it comes back quick. When I turn on the 1250, it has a lot more speed through those turns, but I have to have a better surf technique to actually come out of the turns. And then pumping, the 1250 is just a pumping beast. You have tons of glide, whereas this thing, my lungs are roached pretty quick, you know, when I'm doing that. So why?
Okay, well, probably the biggest thing you touched, the biggest difference, okay, really between the 1250 and the CF 1200 is the chord percentage thickness. Okay, so
That's
that
this part
thicker
here.
chord, the thicker section. Okay, and we'll add some images for that to make it super clear for people. But the thicker section of the 1200 is more forgiving. That combined with way more anhedral tip curve and the lower aspect, right? So the aspect ratio does come into play, but it's in combination with these other elements. It's not on its own.
Right. So the thickness with the curve, and then
more anhedral tip curve, more sweep, lower aspect.
Right.
There's a more stable, forgiving ride. That's why we made those foils that shape. It's why we call them the carving free ride, because they're about making it easier to turn, easier to carve, and more forgiving. And yes, the trade-off is you're not going to pump as efficiently on a foil like that, but you're going to be able to jam it in the pocket. Hey, I'd rather get one wave and actually do some turns than look like a kook and go straight for 10. But, you know, that's up to you. Do whatever you want.
And bottom line is you can't catch any waves. You can't rip it or pump back out and get more waves if you can't catch a wave and go.
Yeah, that's right. So if you are a really high-performance rider, there are some high-performance riders that can throw the tips out and crank turns on high-aspect foils. Well, hey, if that's you, go for your life. Do it, you know. But that is a very small percentage of foil riders out there. And we're trying to make foils for people who want to increase their skill range and get out there and actually successfully do the sport. We're not trying to raise the bar to make the sport harder. We're trying to make it easier because it's so much fun. We want as many people as possible to experience this because it's just so fun, man, as you know. So let's not make it harder. Let's make it easier. That's what the CF range is about.
Okay. So coming back to so you got basically in your line, you've got the CF, which is the low aspect, easy to ride, HS, which is the high speed mid aspect, which you're going to get higher performance, but also a little harder to ride. And then, you know, is there space in your line for like a high aspect range? Is there a point? Or is it just like, hey, I'm scrapping it? Like there is no need for high aspect because people can't ride it.
I guess it's kind of cool with the America's Cup happening in New Zealand right now, and we're all stuck here. All the best sailors and sail designers are here. And the cool thing about the rules for the America's Cup this year is everyone's got to show their boats, so you can't have it hidden. So, yeah, we've got a whole bunch of prototypes we're working on. Here's a couple. We will have a high aspect foil at some point in 2021. So, yeah, we're working on it. And luckily, we are doing some work with some of the America's Cup sailors. Because, yeah, if you want to go really fast and have maximum efficiency and you're happy to trade off that easy to jam a turn feel, then, yeah, we are going to make a foil for that. But we're not rushing it because, in reality, I still see that as a small percentage of the market. If you want to race, maximum pump, race downwind, that's going to be the foil for you. How many people can actually race downwind foil right now? I don't know, 10 in the world, you know? Like, hey, that's not a big market. That's not where we're targeting it. But for race winging or performance flat water pumping, then, yeah, that foil is going to have a place.
Right. So can you pick up that little blade in the background again? What's that? We've
got a couple here. So these ones are actually going to a team rider, Japanese team rider. You may have seen a video of him pumping around, actually on the CF 1600, racing some kayaks last year.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's going to be using these in a race coming up in December. So yeah, we'll see how he goes. But I mean, I can just ride this foil, right? Because it's super flat, it's super high aspect, and we're not putting this one into production because it's too hard to ride. It's too straight, right? I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
It's super fast. It's super fine. It's 12 mil thick. Now this one's about AR 10. This one is 13. Okay, this is AR 13, right? Good luck to you if you want to turn this thing, but this is about the aspect ratio that the America's Cup guys are running. And this actually came out of one of their computers. I can't really tell you too much more than that. And yeah, it's super fast, but it is not easy to ride. So we're still working on it, and we're going to probably shimmy it down to something that is more user-friendly, but still really efficient. And there's, you know, a whole bunch of parameters that can make that happen, and we're working on it step by step.
I can barely ride, your newest, latest, and greatest high aspects that aren't high aspects, that are mid aspects.
What high aspect? You mean the 1250? It's mid aspect. Stop
no,
saying
I'm messing with you, mate. I'm just messing with you. No, I've been loving this thing, but it did take a little adjustment, you know, even just going to the, you know, changing over from kind of the lower aspect range or the bigger HS range to a smaller performance wing. It takes some adjustment. It takes a little bit of adjustment and tuning. I've been able to, you know, increase my ability and, you know, carve turns better and pump better and things. Once I got used to it, it just took me a little adjustment. So I can only imagine, you know, trying to wing on one of those blades you got back there. That's freaking impossible to rock, you know, like.
Yeah, for winging, it's okay. Like, that's the thing. Winging and kiting is a lot more forgiving because you're holding something, right? So as soon as you're holding something, everything gets way easier and you can go more radical. So that's where the high aspect for us is probably going to, you know, if people want to go fast winging or kiting, you know, like the windsurf guys, they're all riding foils around, you know, but it depends on the brand, but between 7 and 9. And so those are, I'd call those high aspect foils, right? And they are going fairly fast. The kite race foils, they're around 7 or 8, and they're going super fast.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, there's a place for it, but there's always a trade-off. So where are you at in your riding? Are you like absolutely ripping on every wave you catch? Well, then yeah, you can look at making something more efficient and faster and harder to ride. Or are you just wanting to catch waves and get some turns? Well, you're actually going to need a lower aspect foil. Like Dylan Fish, who's a classic, he loves both of them, but he actually prefers the 1050 because it's lower aspect and he can crank it in turns in the pocket, right?
Right.
So that's the bigger equation for most people.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that, you know, again, it's a foiling is surfing sport first, and then all the surf stuff is playing into working well for winging. It's playing into, you know, for kiting and all those other things. Like, you want a dedicated, what's up, dude?
Oh, just having a stretch. No, can't you see the wind's coming up, man? I'm sitting here talking to you guys.
You're itching. You're like, dude, your drinking's taking too long. Let's go foil. Come on. Nice. I'm jealous.
The wind's coming up. Sorry.
You're a true frother, dude. You're a true frother. It's like dealing with an ADD 3-year-old in freaking nursery school. I love it. No, so I mean, you know, again, we basically want to be making stuff that you're making stuff that is user friendly. That's the whole point of it, is that those parameters that are going into this design plan, which, you know, I'm going to have you repeat those again. Just, hey, here's the 10 parameters that are the key things that I'm looking at.
Yeah, we can swing through it really quick again. Yeah. Yeah,
it's just saying, you know, it's just those are the most important pieces to the puzzle. So just tell me in as short as you can say the 10 parameters. Okay, here's the 10 parameters I considered for creating a wing. Bing,
okay,
bing,
well,
bing, bing.
Okay, here you go. Okay, so there are many parameters involved in the way a foil is going to work for you. Let's go over some of them. Okay, so area is key, and within area, you got surface area, projected area, wetted area. You've got the plan form, which is generally the outline shape, which is the root chord in relation to the tip area, the leading edge sweep, the tip sweep, the taper, both in thickness and outline, okay? And those all come together to give you the aspect ratio of the foil, okay? Then you've got chord percentage thickness. That is at least as equally important as the rest. You've got the section shape. You've got the chord percentage thickness taper of the section from the center to the tips. You've got form drag, which is the whole rig and how it moves through the water, which is all about the curves, fairings, and round shapes generally, okay? Have you ever seen a square fish? Probably not. Okay, tail pitch is a massive influence on the rig. That's why we have the tail trim fairings. And then flex of your mast and your wings is another important element. Those are the main elements involved.
Those are the main 25 elements that make up the 10 elements.
That's 10. I don't know. That's around about 10. There's about another 10 as well.
Around about 10. I love it. Hey, Armie, thanks so much for coming out and talking to us today. I know you're frothing to get out there, so let's wrap this up so you can go take a sesh. You know, thanks so much, man. It means a lot.
Yeah, man, the wind's coming up, but always good to talk to you guys anytime. And yeah, super stoked for you guys setting this up and helping us just try and clarify this. I know there's plenty of parameters. It's a little complicated, but it all boils down to making it as easy as possible for you guys to get out there and have fun. It's all about the sensation of foiling. Let's make it easy and do it. I think the wind's coming up.